So welcome to the February edition of Something I've Learned. And today we have my very good friend, Chantal Duvivier, who's come to share a lesson of some kind that she's learned in life. And I can guarantee she's learned a lot. She's had an incredible experience, born in France, lived a long time in Britain, now back in France. But there's no point in me saying anything more. I'll just hand over to you, Chantal, to share something you've learned in life.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I shall be sharing with you an experience a long time ago, which happened. It taught me resilience. That's the word I would qualify the experience. So it happened, I think it's 1979, during the Fastnet race. I was not on the race, but I was on a boat, which belonged to my husband and one of his partners. And we had our three children on board. And we were going to join Brittany to stay with some friends who also have a boat. And it happened that we left England and we happened to stop, I think, in one of the little islands. Can't remember the name. I should have looked it up to give you. It's a small island, one of which has an airport. Anyway, we left there when one of my daughters felt quite sick during the night, so we had to put off our departure of our sailing for the next day because she wasn't feeling very well. She's had mussel and she didn't digest the mussel. She's never touched mussel since, I may say. And so we spent the day resting and left the day after. We had every modern equipment on our boat, sailing boat. It had an engine as well, but we mainly were sailing, only using the engine when you leave the port. And the weather forecast seemed to be okay. And it somehow deteriorated very, very rapidly. And we heard on our radio that there was a gale coming and we were too far to go back. We had to go forward. So we also learned that the people in the Fastnet race were also being diverted and may come into our path, although they were further east of us. Anyway, the weather deteriorated and we had to keep on going with the wind. And my husband had to stay holding the helmet. I forgot what you call it. La barre. I can't think of the word in English. And it's like a wheel. And he had been doing it for more than 24 hours and he was getting very tired. So I used to feed him with a cup of tea and kept our children who were chained. We had done a lot of sailing with them before, and we have all the security, life jacket, children attached to the side of the boat, and the children had gone through a lot of experiences should there be problem. I think we've never actually had seen waves which were incredibly high. Personally, I have never seen anything like it. Force 9 is, as you can imagine, where waves can go up to 30 meters, even more, like very tall buildings. And our boat was being rocked. China kept on falling. The children were inside. And I fed my husband with a cup of tea regularly. And at one stage, he said, I can't do it any longer. You'll have to take over. What? I said, well, you know very well I can't do very much. He said, yes, you can. You can gear the boat and you stay, I'll set what you have to follow. You'll go in circle. And if you are pushed a little bit, you go back. Anyway, I followed the regulation. He went off to sleep. My second daughter, was not feeling very well at that time either. So that did worry me a bit. But the most important was to keep the boat safe for all of us. And I had to take over, and I did it for about 6 hours. in the middle of the night, and the children were asleep. My husband was sleeping. Then he came back 6 hours later, and he said, I think you ought to go with Nadej, my second daughter, who was then feeling quite sick. So I looked at her and I diagnosed that she probably was having acute appendicitis and more than likely coming up to a peritonitis, and I had to ring a doctor very quickly. So my husband, who had everything on the ship, we rang, and we managed to speak to a doctor in France, and I described the signs and symptoms of my daughter, and he said, we shall send an helicopter from Brest to come over, and then she'll have to be heliported, lifted on a sort of what you drop down to the boat for her to go. But somebody will have to come down first to help me to put her, since my husband was busy with keeping, the ship governing, to be governed. Anyway, the helicopter came and we saw him throwing, and the thing was a swing. There was no way he could drop it. So he said, I can't do it. I'm afraid you have to speak to the doctor who was in the helicopter. The doctor said, I understand you are a nurse. You have got, I understand, an emergency equipment which contains saline, a drip. I had obviously the IV. I had everything, and blades as well. And I said, but look, I know what you're going to ask me, but I've never operated anybody. He said, you have been, during your training, you must have been into the operating theater. I said, yes, but it was mainly lungs. And he said, yes, but you have seen what surgeons do. I said, what do you want me to do? He says, well, I want you to cut and get to through the side. You'll have to, obviously, I will give you the info, and you'll have to pierce and put the needle big enough, so the spout of the pouch of saline with a tube, and you've got gloves, so it will all be sterilized, and get your daughter some tablets to make her a bit sleepy. Anyway, it was an absolute palaver. And so I did it, and the pus came into the pouch. Well, there was another pouch I had where pus could come out, and a lot of ship had been warned that we were in a bit of a danger with this sick child, and we were gradually reaching closer to the coast because my husband had then moved on according to the flow of the wind. And a lot of ship, a big ship came, and on both sides to help us to stop the waves. And to cut a long story short, we eventually got at Brest with an emergency, a surgeon and a theater into a van where they give emergency attention to somebody like Nadej, who was 10 at that time. And she was taken off very quickly with me. And I left with her, left my husband. And I realized when we were into that van, I had all the money and everybody's passport with me attached to a belt. So she was operated very quickly, but apparently I saved her life and made a terrible scar. She's got an awful scar. And I mean, the lesson of this was I had no idea I could ever have survived seeing waves which were in front of us. Fortunately, my husband and I kept very calm the whole time. I had asked him to throw the bubble, which contained, it has everything. If you throw a bubble, it means you can be for 3 days and survive. And my husband refused to do that. He felt we would get there. So what did he teach me? Resilience, I said. Hope, I prayed. I'm a Christian, and I feel very strongly that we were in God's hands, all of us. And I had asked for help, as most people would do, I think, whether Christian or not. I'm sure people call out for help. And the wonderful help we got from the doctor, surgeon, anesthetist was unbelievable. For the 10 days I was in the hospital with my daughter, I was helped to stay with the anesthetist, stayed with a surgeon, stayed with another doctor. They offered me hospitality and was in touch with my husband, who managed to have one French chap who was in Brest and another Frenchman. They took over and helped him to come round, because we had a friend who had a summer house where my daughter could have rested. But we were away from each other for a month. People lending money, since I had the purse with me. I had all the money, which I had forgotten completely. It was around my belt. And anyway, I had very little clothes, but I was given a type of clothes. And my daughter was safe. The ship was safe. Everybody was safe. So an experience of life you do not forget. You have to trust the person who knows about the boat, which was my husband, and also keep calm at all times for your children. They never panicked. They probably were scared, but they didn't say very much because they were down, in the cabin. And I didn't want them to come out, but they did see the waves at some stage. Anyways, that's one experience I shall never forget, nor the children. And the daughter who had the operation is now a GP in England. She has a ghastly scar, but she's safe. And so we thank the medical people, the hospital, and the friendliness of all these people who love the sea, who are giving their time, their love to help. Whether English, French, there was a great solidarity. So my thanks to all these people again. And my son is about to write a book about the experience. I think he has had time this past year, and he felt he would write our story because he was a small boy at that time. And he also has never forgotten it. And he feels it's worth writing. We were in the newspaper at the time in the Brittany area. Didn't take much notice of that. And we did go back a month and a half later, back with our boat. But my daughter had to fly at one of the islands because she felt sick again. So we didn't take risk anymore. So she flew back. So an English friend picked her up too at the airport. So that's my little time with you. I hope I haven't been too long. I hope
that has been most a heart-stopping story. And when you just briefly outlined it before we came to do the broadcast, I didn't imagine at all it was quite so dramatic, because you faced multiple perils. It wasn't just the waves to start off with, but also, and I guess at some point, you must have faced the possibility that you were going to lose your daughter on that voyage.
Yes, I think it became apparent after my husband had had his sleep. He was worried about her, and she was very ill, really. I mean, peritonitis is terrible. I mean, you're not chances of surviving if you are not operated. And there was very little we could do except that I had to not obey, but accept the guidance lines of that surgeon who was online with me. And I was petrified of doing what I had to do, but I had to do it. Otherwise, my daughter might have died. So fortunately, I'm a nurse. So
I think most people would shudder to do that in the quiet of their own living room with a comfortable table and, everything just as clean and proper as it could be. But you had to do it on a boat that was rocking on.
Yes, but it reminds you of, I mean, at the time, I just was not particularly old. I was in my early 30s. You've got to get going. You've got to keep that man whose trust, you have full trust in him. He's the one who can guide that boat. I could guide a boat, but by his directions, but I cannot follow. I haven't got any license for sailing, so it was very limited. My capacities, my great, I would say, I was very lucky. I'm never sick on a ship, never. So it can be gale or not gale, I don't feel sick. So that was very fortunate.
That was one mercy. Yeah.
It
And
was a great blessing.
my other question was going to be, did you ever go back on the boat? But you've already said you
Oh,
went back to
yes.
the same place a month later.
Yes, we did. But we had to bring the boat back.
Ah, yes, of course.
So
Yeah,
you have to take it back. And
yeah.
already my husband's, was over, had taken more holidays than expected, and his partners were wanting him to be back. You had to go to court at some stage as well, but obviously,
Mm.
due to the emergencies and the difficulty, obviously everybody in England knew about the Fastnet race. Many people died
Mm.
who were doing the race. We were not doing the race. We happened.
So that was that. I remember there was a year when a lot of boats got into trouble on the
Yes,
Fastnet, and that was that year by the sounds
yes,
of it.
it was that year.
Wow. Yeah.
And
And just one other question was, you're talking about the surgeon guiding you as to what to do. Was that the doctor in the helicopter, or did you get on the line to the
no, he was
hospital?
on the helicopter, but then he had to go back. But we were still in touch all the time. Fortunately, my husband had all the modern equipment of that at that time, where
Yeah.
you obviously had to, when you were doing crossing to the Channel Islands or wherever, Spain, if you wanted to go to Spain. But we'd never ventured any further than Brittany. We'd done it before. We'd crossed 3 times, but never with that sort. So the children had done a lot of sailing for 6 years before. They were tiny when we had the boat. Not that I was very keen on the sea myself. I like the Mediterranean because it's warm, blue. I'm a bit scared of the water as well. So if you're married to a man who loves sailing, you follow and you learn about yourself. That's one thing I will say. I learned a lot about myself.
Mm. Well, thank you. That's two good lessons, and I think we'll all chase resilience.
Yes.
And I noted what you said about trying to remain calm, because that's not always easy. But if you can actually actively try to do that, I'm sure it makes a critical situation easier to deal with.
Yes, I think it's probably because of my training as a nurse. You were put in situations where they would look at you and say, we have got a fire. As it happened, I did go through a fire, a real fire, in one of the hospitals I worked at. And your patients come first, and you have to stay calm at all times.
Yeah.
At all
Well,
times.
that
Because
served
if
you
you
well on that.
start,
That served you well on that particular day. So,
absolutely,
well,
yes.
listen, now, thank you so much, Chantal,
Not
for
at all.
coming
It was
all
my
this way
pleasure. Okay.
to join us. For those watching a bit later on, the Knowledge Exchange website has details of other events, but normally on the first of every month, 8 o'clock in the morning UK time, we have 15 minutes about climate change and living more sustainably. And then the last Friday of every month, we have this slot of something I've learned. And I never ask what people are going to say, and I usually don't know. So it's always a surprise to me as well. And the archive shows that as you go through life, you learn lots of lessons. So why not pass them on? So I hope to see you again sometime in the next month or two. That's it for now. Goodbye from me.
Okay, and goodbye to everyone for having listened. Bye-bye.